Okay, so what if you could map out one of the biggest decisions of your life, who to love, with the precision of mathematics? Today, we're diving into a pretty radical idea, a metaphysics of choice that uses, of all things, algebra to explain commitment. Now, I know it sounds wild, but it might just change how you think about relationships forever. I mean, it's a question that feels a little weird to even ask, right? Love is supposed to be messy and emotional and totally unpredictable. But what if a branch of mathematics actually offered one of the clearest models for understanding what commitment really is? Let's take a look. So, get this. This is the provocative statement at the absolute heart of this whole idea. The claim is that when you commit to one person, you are making a very specific mathematical choice. You are intentionally setting the determinant of your romantic life to zero. So, what on earth does that even mean? Let's unpack it. All right, so this framework reframes commitment as something called a projection. In math, a projection is actually pretty simple. It takes something complex and multidimensional and, well, it flattens it onto a simpler surface. The easiest way to picture this is to think of a 3D object casting its 2D shadow. And here is where it gets really personal. Imagine your life's possibilities, every single person you could ever meet, every future you could possibly have, as this huge multidimensional space. In this model, the act of choosing one person is a projection. You're taking all those infinite what ifs and collapsing them down into one single chosen reality, a single vector. But okay, that brings up a really big question. If you collapse all those possibilities, where do they go? They don't just vanish into thin air. In this framework, they're moved into a place called the ethical kernel. To get this, we just need a quick definition of what a kernel is in math. Think of it like a zero-out box. It's a special place where you put all the inputs that you want to have zero effect on the final outcome. They're not destroyed, they're just intentionally nullified. And this is where the analogy gets its real philosophical weight. The kernel is the conscious sacrifice of commitment. It means you are intentionally mapping all those other paths, all those other potential partners, to zero. You're placing them in a category where they no longer influence the outcome of your life's equation. So you see, it's a really active, conscious choice. It's the act of saying, I am taking all these variables and mapping them to zero, so they no longer influence the function of my life. You are defining what gets sent to the kernel so that your chosen relationship can have a unique, stable form. So if monogamy is about collapsing the system, what's the alternative? Well, in this model, non-monogamy is the exact opposite. It's the choice to keep the system as complex and multidimensional as possible. It's a choice to maintain what's called a high rank. The goal here is to avoid that final collapse, to not set that determinant to zero. It's a choice to keep the transformation invertible, which is just a fancy way of saying no path is permanently closed off, no information is lost by being mapped to zero. All the different romantic possibilities are allowed to overlap and coexist in the system. But, and this is a big but, maintaining that kind of complexity isn't free. And the analogy holds up here too. Just like a computer uses a ton more processing power to run a complex simulation, this model argues it takes a huge amount of emotional labor to manage multiple overlapping relationships. That is the inherent trade-off. And all of this really leads us to the central philosophical conflict, which, you guessed it, boils down to a mathematical idea: the difference between a one-to-one relationship and a many-to-many one. So here's the rule in the math. For a relationship to be truly one-to-one or injective, the kernel, remember our zero-out box, has to be totally empty. The second you put other possibilities in there, you lose that unique one-to-one connection. So you basically end up with two totally distinct philosophies. On one side, the monogamist argument is all about that uniqueness. By moving all other options into the kernel, you create this really clear, unambiguous one-to-one bond. On the other side, the non-monogamist argument asks, hey, why impose those limits at all? It sees a richer, more expansive life in embracing the complexity of many connections. So at the end of the day, this isn't about what's right or what's wrong. It's about seeing that there are two fundamentally different equations for living a romantic life. Each approach is optimizing for something different, and each one comes with its own unique benefits and its own costs. So let's just lay out these two paths. On one hand, you can maintain a high-rank system. You keep your world complex and multidimensional, but the trade-off is high emotional labor. On the other hand, you can apply a projection, collapsing your world down to a single, stable reality. But the trade-off is sacrificing all those other possible futures to the kernel. What's so powerful about this whole framework is that it gives us a brand new language for these really old ideas. Suddenly, commitment isn't just a feeling, it's a projection. Sacrifice isn't just a loss, it's the kernel. Complexity becomes rank. And maybe most importantly, uniqueness isn't just the default, it's a very conscious choice. And hey, this model doesn't have to stop at romance, right? Think about any huge decision you've ever made. Choosing a career path, deciding where to live. Every big choice is a kind of projection. So the final question is really for you. What possibilities have you collapsed into a single reality, and what have you intentionally placed in the kernel of your own life?